Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Cole Brennan had concrete dust in his blood and calluses that told stories of 18 years building an empire from nothing. At 38, he commanded respect on every construction site in the tri-state area. But his empire started with his immigrant parents Frank and Helen scraping together enough money to buy a single-use truck and a dream. While other kids play video games, Cole spent summers learning to pour foundations and read blueprints. By 16, he was running crews. By 25, he had transformed Brennan Construction from a one-truck operation into a $100 million enterprise specializing in luxury developments and commercial complexes. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd built his life like he built his buildings, with meticulous planning, unshakable foundations, and an eye for detail that bordered on obsession. Every contract, every relationship, every decision was calculated for maximum stability and return. Lily Foster had been the crown jewel of his carefully constructed life. A stunning blonde with an MBA from Wharton, she brought sophistication to his blue-collar success. When they married 8 years ago, it seemed perfect, beauty and brains paired with power and ambition. She'd grown up in Connecticut wealth, the kind of old money that made Cole's nouveau riche status feel like wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite fit. Their Westchester mansion was a testament to Cole's success, with its sprawling grounds and infinity pool overlooking the Hudson Valley. Lily had decorated it with the kind of understated elegance that screamed expensive, all neutral tones and designer furniture that cost more than most people's cars. But success had its price. Cole worked 80-hour weeks without salary, pouring every penny back into expansion, while Lily attended charity galas and spa retreats with her circle of wealthy wives. Cole was in muddy boots reviewing architectural plans at dawn and negotiating with city officials until midnight. "You're married to the business, not me," Lily would say, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her wine glass during their increasingly rare dinners together. Cole would look up from his laptop, exhaustion weighing on his shoulders like wet concrete. "This is for us, Lily. Everything I do is for us." But he'd started noticing things. The way she turned her phone face down when he entered a room. How she developed sudden interest in yoga classes that ran late into the evening. The expensive lingerie he'd never seen her wear for him. Frank and Helen Brennan worshipped their son, but they also feared him a little. Cole's intensity, his ruthless business instincts, his ability to hold grudges with the permanence of reinforced steel. These traits had built their fortune, but sometimes left his parents feeling like they were living with a controlled explosion. "You need to slow down, Cole," Helen would say in her thick Irish accent, watching her son review contracts at the kitchen table where she'd taught him to do homework 20 years earlier. "Family is more important than money." Cole would look at his parents, Frank with his weathered hands and proud smile, Helen with her worry lines and unconditional love, and feel the weight of their sacrifice. They'd given him everything, worked themselves to the bone so he could go to college, supported his every decision even when it meant risking their modest savings. The business was his gift to them, his way of proving their faith hadn't been misplaced. But it was also his obsession, his identity, his reason for being. Every blueprint was his signature, every completed project a monument to his vision. Trevor Walsh entered their lives like a parasite disguised as a benefactor. A smooth-talking development consultant with silver hair and expensive watches, he'd approached Brennan Construction about a partnership on a massive mixed-use project in Manhattan. Cole had been skeptical. Trevor's references were impressive, but vague. His portfolio showed remarkable success, but lacked specific details. But Trevor had something Cole didn't: connections to old money Manhattan, relationships with zoning boards and planning committees that could fast-track permits and streamline approvals. For a builder like Cole, who'd fought tooth and nail for every permit and clearance, Trevor's promises of insider access were intoxicating. During their first meeting at the Union Club, Trevor had studied Cole with calculating gray eyes. "You're everything I've heard," he'd said, raising his scotch in a toast. "The king of concrete and steel." But kings need kingdoms, and kingdoms need diplomats. Cole should have trusted his instincts, should have recognized the predator beneath the polish. Instead, he'd shaken Trevor's hand and invited him into their world, never suspecting that Trevor Walsh wasn't interested in business partnerships. He was hunting for something far more valuable and personal. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday in March when Cole came home early from a site inspection and found Lily's car in the driveway, beside a silver BMW he didn't recognize. The house felt different, charged with an energy that made his skin crawl. Lily's laughter drifted from the living room, bright and musical in a way Cole hadn't heard in months. He found them sitting close on the Italian leather sofa, papers spread across the coffee table, their heads bent together over what Lily claimed was consultation on our charity auction. Trevor Walsh stood smoothly, extending his hand with the kind of confident smile that instantly set Cole's teeth on edge. "Cole, perfect timing. Lily and I were just discussing the seating arrangements for the foundation gala." But Cole had noticed things at contractors I couldn't miss. Trevor's tie was loosened, Lily's lipstick had been reapplied, but her hair was slightly mussed, and the papers on the table were financial documents for their personal accounts, not charity materials. Over the following weeks, Cole's suspicions grew like cancer. He started coming home at unexpected times, checking credit card statements, paying attention to details his work-obsessed mind had previously ignored. Lily's yoga classes now included meditation retreats and wellness workshops that kept her away for entire weekends. Her phone had developed a password she claimed was for security. The revelation came in the form of a manila envelope left on his office desk one morning. No return address, no note, just a collection of photographs that turned his blood to ice water. Lily and Trevor at a hotel in the city. Lily and Trevor having dinner at restaurants Cole recognized as places he'd wanted to take her, but never had time. Lily and Trevor in his BMW, her hand on his thigh as they drove through Central Park. But the final photograph was the one that triggered something dark and permanent in Cole's chest. Lily wearing the diamond tennis bracelet he'd given her for their anniversary, laughing at something Trevor was whispering in her ear while they lay tangled in sheets that clearly weren't theirs. Cole sat in his office for 6 hours, staring at those photographs, feeling something die inside him that would never come back to life. When Lily came home that evening, humming and carrying shopping bags from Bergdorf Goodman, he was waiting in the kitchen with the evidence spread across the granite island like autopsy photos. "Care to explain these?" His voice was conversational, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. Lily's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, denial, defiance, and finally a kind of cold relief. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." Cole's hands were steady as he poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon. "The question is, what happens now?" She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her designer purse clutched at her lap like a shield. "I want a divorce, Cole. I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for years. With him." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "Trevor understands me. He makes time for me. He doesn't disappear into spreadsheets and blueprints." Cole took a slow sip of bourbon, studying his wife's face like he was reading structural plans. "How long?" 6 months. No shame, no apology, just facts delivered with the clinical precision of someone who'd already mentally moved on. The divorce proceedings were surgical in their efficiency. Cole's attorney was a bulldog named Richardson who specialized in protecting high-net-worth clients from predatory spouses. But Lily had her own legal team, and Trevor had connections that suddenly made certain judges very accommodating to her requests. The settlement was devastating, but not because of the money. Cole had always known Lily was expensive. What gutted him was watching her systematically dismantle 8 years of marriage with the enthusiasm of someone redecorating a room. She kept the Westchester house, half the liquid assets, and alimony that would maintain her lifestyle indefinitely. But Cole's real education and betrayal was yet to come. Frank and Helen had watched their son's marriage implode with the helpless horror of parents watching their child in a car accident. They'd never liked Lily. Her obvious disdain for their working-class background had been thinly veiled at best, but they'd respected Cole's choice and welcomed her into the family. "She never deserved you. Helen said fiercely the night the divorce was finalized, her Irish temper flaring as she watched Cole mechanically eat the dinner she'd prepared. That woman wouldn't know loyalty if it bit her on her surgically enhanced. Ma. Cole's voice cut through her tirade gently but firmly. It's done. But Frank was studying his son with worried eyes. What about the business, Cole? You got your whole life tied up in this company. Cole looked at his father, this man who'd sacrificed everything so his son could build something permanent and valuable. The business is solid, Dad. Nothing changes that. He was wrong. 3 weeks after his divorce was finalized, Cole arrived at the Brennan Construction headquarters to find his parents waiting in his office, wearing expressions he'd never seen before. Guilt mixed with terror, mixed with something that looked disturbingly like resignation. "We need to talk," Frank said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Cole poured coffee for all three of them, noting how his parents sat stiffly in chairs they'd occupied countless times over the years. "What's going on?" Helen was crying before Frank even started speaking. "Cole, you know we love you. You know everything we've done has been for you and the business." Something cold began spreading through Cole's chest. What happened? Frank cleared his throat, a man preparing to deliver his own death sentence. "Trevor Walsh came to see us. He made us an offer for the business." The coffee cup in Cole's hand didn't break when he set it down, though his grip could have shattered steel. "What kind of offer?" "He wants to marry Lily," Helen whispered. "He wants to take over the company. He says it'll provide stability, continuity. He has ideas for expansion, connections we don't have." Cole's vision tunneled until all he could see were his parents' faces, two people who'd given him everything and were now preparing to take it all away. "And you said?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm opening in the earth. "We said yes," Frank finally whispered. "Cole, we're getting old. We're tired. Trevor has a business plan, financing lined up, connections that could make this company 10 times bigger than." "Stop." Cole's voice was so quiet it barely disturbed the air, but both his parents flinched as if he'd shouted. "To stop talking." He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled, and walked to the window overlooking the construction yard where trucks bearing his name were preparing for another day of building other people's dreams. "When?" he asked without turning around. "Next month," Helen said through her tears. "Cole, please understand. Get out." Still quiet, still controlled, but with an undertone that made the office feel like a tomb. "Both of you, get out of my office." After they left, Cole sat alone in the headquarters he'd built, surrounded by awards and photographs and architectural plans that suddenly felt like memorials to a dead man. He'd survived his wife's betrayal, had even understood it on some level. But this was annihilation. His phone rang, and Trevor Walsh's smooth voice filled the office like poison gas. "Cole, I hope your parents explain the situation. I want you to know this isn't personal. It's just business." Cole listened to Trevor's words, explanations about continuity and stability, assurances that Cole would always have a place in the organization, offers of consulting positions and partnership opportunities, and felt something fundamental shift inside him like tectonic plates realigning. "Trevor," Cole said finally, his voice carrying the weight of 18 years of brutal work and absolute dedication. "Do you know what the difference is between construction and demolition?" "I'm sorry. In construction, you build something to last forever. In demolition, you identify the load-bearing supports and remove them systematically until the whole structure collapses under its own weight." Trevor's laugh was nervous. "I'm not sure I follow." Cole smiled for the first time in weeks, and it was an expression that would have made a shark retreat to deeper waters. "You will." Chapter 3. The Transfer of Power. The announcement appeared in the local business journal 3 weeks later. Walsh assumes leadership of Brennan Construction in strategic acquisition. The photograph showed Trevor and Lily cutting a ribbon at the company headquarters, both of them wearing matching smiles and expensive suits that somehow made them look like gravediggers at a funeral. Cole had stopped coming to the office the day after his parents' betrayal. Instead, he spent his mornings running brutal 10-mile circuits through the woods behind his temporary apartment, pushing his body until his mind went blank and the rage became something manageable. His afternoons were spent in a different kind of preparation, making phone calls, reviewing contracts, and planning something that would make Sherman's march to the sea look like a family picnic. The transition was supposed to be seamless. Trevor had assured the board, the investors, and the major clients that nothing would change except improved efficiency and expanded opportunities. Cole Brennan would remain as a senior consultant, lending his expertise while enjoying a reduced workload and better work-life balance. What Trevor didn't understand was that Cole Brennan wasn't an employee or even a partner. He was the business. Every major contract, every key relationship, every critical system and process existed because Cole had personally built it, maintained it, and protected it with the fierce dedication of someone defending his family. The first sign of trouble came when Riverside Development, Brennan Construction's biggest client, called the office asking to speak with Cole about their upcoming $40 million luxury tower project. The receptionist transferred the call to Trevor, who spent an hour explaining the transition and assuring Mr. Riverside that the project was in excellent hands. "I appreciate that," Mr. Riverside had said politely, "but I need to speak with Cole Brennan. This is his project, his design, his baby. We're not comfortable proceeding without his direct involvement." Trevor had tried to explain that Cole was stepping back, that Trevor himself had extensive experience with projects of this scope, that the company's capabilities hadn't changed. But what he discovered was that Cole hadn't just built buildings. He'd built trust, and trust wasn't transferable like a deed or a contract. The second crisis emerged when the City Planning Commission called to discuss permit issues on 3 different projects. The bureaucrat on the other end was confused and slightly irritated. "We deal with Cole Brennan on these matters. We've been working with him for 15 years. Who exactly are you? And why are you calling me about his projects?" Trevor's expensive education and impressive resume suddenly felt inadequate when faced with the reality that Cole had spent 18 years building relationships that couldn't be replicated with a handshake and a business card. Every permit expediter, every union representative, every supplier and subcontractor knew Cole personally, trusted his word, and had built their own businesses around the reliability of his promises. By the end of the first week, Trevor was experiencing the administrative equivalent of trying to perform surgery with a butter knife. Nothing worked the way it was supposed to. Computer systems required passwords only Cole knew. Vendor accounts had payment terms and credit arrangements that existed on handshake agreements with Cole personally. Project timelines that looked straightforward on paper revealed themselves to be dependent on Cole's personal relationships with inspectors, suppliers, and municipal officials. Lily had watched her new husband's confidence erode with growing alarm. She'd married Trevor Walsh because he represented everything Cole wasn't: sophisticated, connected, refined. Trevor belonged to the right clubs, knew the right people, and promised to elevate her social status in ways Cole's blue-collar billions never could. But the man frantically making phone calls and sweating through expensive shirts while trying to manage a business he'd thought would run itself wasn't the suave operator who'd seduced her with promises of effortless wealth and endless leisure. "You said this would be easy," she'd snapped after finding Trevor in his study at 2 in the morning, surrounded by contracts and looking like a man slowly drowning in paperwork. "You said Cole was replaceable." Trevor had looked up from municipal compliance manual with bloodshot eyes. "He is replaceable. It's just going to take time to establish new relationships." But time was the one thing they didn't have. The Riverside project had a hard deadline tied to seasonal construction windows and city permit expirations. The mixed-use development in Brooklyn needed foundation work to begin before ground freeze. Every day of delay cost thousands of dollars and damaged relationships that had taken Cole years to build. Meanwhile, Cole was working 18-hour days in his apartment, making calls and sending emails that looked routine but were actually surgical strikes against the business he'd spent his life building. He called in favors, activated relationships, and deployed his reputation like a weapon aimed at the heart of Trevor's newfangled leadership. A conversation with the head of the Concrete Workers Union was particularly satisfying. "Danny, it's Cole. I need to let you know that I'm no longer with Brennan Construction. Trevor Walsh is running things now." "Yes, that's right. Trevor Walsh. Never heard of him either. Just wanted you to know so you can adjust your expectations accordingly." The The call to the city's chief building inspector was even more devastating in its understatement. Mike, Cole Brennan. Just a heads up that I'm stepping away from Brennan Construction. Trevor Walsh will be handling permits and inspections going forward. No, I don't think you met him. He's Lily's new husband. Yeah, that's the one. Anyway, just wanted to give you advance notice so you can plan accordingly. Every call was professional, courteous, and absolutely lethal. Cole wasn't bad-mouthing Trevor or sabotaging projects directly. He was simply withdrawing the network of relationships and goodwill that made Brennan Construction functional. It was like removing the nervous system from a body and watching it try to walk. The third week brought the phone call Cole had been waiting for. Frank's voice was strained and desperate. Cole, we need to talk. Things aren't going the way we expected. Cole met his parents at the diner where they used to discuss business deals when he was fresh out of college and the company was small enough to run from Frank's kitchen table. His parents looked older, worn down by stress and guilt in a way that should have made Cole feel sympathetic. Instead, he felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The Riverside project is in trouble, Frank said without preamble. They're threatening to pull out. The city is rejecting permits that should be routine. Suppliers are demanding cash up front. Trevor is working around the clock, but Trevor Walsh is a parasite who thought he could inherit 18 years of my work by marrying my ex-wife. Cole finished calmly, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. Helen reached across the table, her eyes red with exhaustion and regret. Cole, please. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Help us fix this. Cole studied his mother's face. This woman who'd sacrificed everything for his success and then handed it to a stranger wearing his wife's recommendation like a resume. You want my help? We'll give you back the company, Frank said desperately. 51% ownership. Full operational control. Trevor can keep a minority stake, but you'll be in charge. Cole took a slow sip of his beer, savoring the moment. And Trevor's reaction to this generous offer. His parents exchanged glances that confirmed what Cole already knew. Trevor Walsh had no intention of giving up control of a $100 million company, regardless of how badly he was mismanaging it. He says he just needs more time, Helen whispered. He says the problems are temporary, that you're sabotaging the transition. Cole's laugh was soft and genuinely amused. Sabotaging? I haven't lifted a finger against Brennan Construction. I've simply stopped carrying it on my back. He stood to leave, dropping cash on the table and looking down at his parents with eyes that held no warmth, no forgiveness, no familial affection. You chose Trevor Walsh over your own son. Live with that choice. Frank grabbed his arm as he turned away. Cole, the business will fail. Everything we built together will be destroyed. Cole looked down at his father's hand, weathered from decades of honest work, trembling now with desperation, and felt the last ember of filial loyalty die in his chest. Dad, he said gently, removing his father's hand with careful precision. You didn't build this business with me. I built it for you, and now I'm going to watch Trevor Walsh burn it to the ground. The next morning, Cole made one final phone call to the Brennan Construction headquarters. Trevor answered on the first ring, his voice tight with stress and barely controlled panic. Cole, thank God. Listen, I think there's been some misunderstanding. These transition issues are more complex than I anticipated. Maybe we could work out some kind of consulting arrangement. Trevor, Cole interrupted, his voice carrying the finality of a judge reading a death sentence. When I learned my parents gave the family business to my ex-wife's new husband, I stopped working 80-hour weeks for free. A week later, Dad called panicked about losing our biggest client. I just said, let him handle it. He's the heir, right? The silence on the other end stretched for 10 seconds before Trevor spoke again, his voice much smaller than before. What do you want? Cole smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. I want to watch you fail. I want to see you lose everything you stole from me. And then, when you're broken and desperate and have nothing left to bargain with, I want you to remember that you did this to yourself. He hung up and began making plans for the next phase of his revenge, the part where Trevor Walsh would learn the difference between owning a business and running one, and where Cole would discover just how far he was willing to go to destroy the people who'd betrayed him. Chapter 4. The heir apparent. 3 days after Cole's final conversation with Trevor, Brennan Construction lost the Riverside contract. The $40 million luxury tower project that Cole had spent 6 months designing and negotiating was awarded to Morrison Development, a smaller firm with one-third the resources, but with Cole Brennan as their exclusive development consultant. Trevor had arrived at the office that morning to find his secretary holding a certified letter from Riverside's legal team. The termination clause was brutal in its simplicity. Failure to meet preliminary milestone deadlines voided the contract with no compensation for work completed. Trevor's hand shook as he read the attached invoice for design fees, money they'd already spent on equipment deposits and crew scheduling. But the real knife in his back came in the form of a congratulatory announcement in the industry newsletter that afternoon. Morrison Development secures Riverside Luxury Tower contract with Cole Brennan leading design team. The accompanying photograph showed Cole shaking hands with Tom Morrison, both men smiling with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Lily found Trevor in his office that evening, staring at quarterly projections that looked like a medical patient's vital signs flatlining. The confident man who'd promised her a lifestyle upgrade was hunched over spreadsheets like a student cramming for an exam he was destined to fail. "How bad is it?" she asked, though his expression had already answered the question. Trevor looked up with eyes that held the hollow desperation of someone watching his life's ambitions evaporate in real time. "We're hemorrhaging money. The Riverside contract was supposed to carry us through the winter. Without it, we'll have to lay off crews, cancel equipment leases, default on supplier agreements." Lily felt something cold settling in her stomach. She'd traded Cole's reliable security for Trevor's promises of something better, and now both seemed to be slipping away like water through her fingers. What about the other projects? The Brooklyn mixed-use development is stalled in permit hell. The commercial plaza in New Jersey has foundation issues that our structural engineer can't solve. Trevor's voice cracked slightly. Every problem we encounter seems to require expertise that walked out the door with your ex-husband. Meanwhile, Cole was having the most productive month of his career. Morrison Development had given him complete creative control and a partnership percentage that made his previous salary look like an allowance. More importantly, Tom Morrison understood that Cole came with relationships and reputation that couldn't be bought or replicated. "You know," Morrison had said during their first official partnership meeting, "I've been trying to break into the high-end market for years. Contractors like us, we build solid, we build reliable, but we don't get invited to the parties where the real money gets discussed." Cole had smiled, already envisioning how to leverage his connections into opportunities that would dwarf anything Brennan Construction had ever attempted. "Tom, by this time next year, we won't need invitations. They'll be begging us to take their money." The plan was elegant in its simplicity: systematically acquire every major project and key relationship that had made Brennan Construction successful, while simultaneously ensuring that Trevor Walsh's inexperience and desperation created enough chaos to prevent effective competition. Cole's first target was the municipal contracts that formed the backbone of Brennan's steady revenue. These weren't glamorous projects, school renovations, road repairs, municipal building maintenance, but they provided reliable cash flow and established credibility for larger bids. The key was understanding that municipal contracts weren't awarded based on who submitted the lowest bid, but on who had the most reliable track record and the best relationships with city officials. Cole had spent 15 years showing up to city council meetings, volunteering for community projects, and building trust with the bureaucrats who actually made contracting decisions. Trevor, meanwhile, was learning that wearing expensive suits and dropping names from his Columbia MBA program didn't carry much weight with a city planning commissioner who'd watched Cole Brennan deliver projects on time and under budget for the past decade. The conversation between Cole and Planning Commissioner Margaret Torres was a masterclass in strategic networking. "Maggie, I wanted to give you a heads up that I'm no longer with Brennan Construction. I've partnered with Morrison Development, and we're looking at bidding on the courthouse renovation project." "Cole, thank God," Torres had replied with genuine relief. "We were wondering what was happening over there." This Walsh character called yesterday asking about permit expedites, and honestly, We had no idea who he was or why he thought he could skip the normal review process. Yeah, Trevor's new to municipal work, Cole had said with diplomatic understatement. Anyway, Tom Morrison and I are putting together a proposal that I think will address all the historical preservation requirements while staying within budget. The courthouse renovation was a $15 million project that Trevor had been counting on to stabilize Brennan Construction's financial position. When Morrison Development was awarded the contract 2 weeks later, Trevor's reaction was volcanic. He'd stormed into Frank and Helen's office, demanding explanations for how their son was systematically destroying the business they'd handed over to him. "This is sabotage," Trevor had raged, waving the contract award letter like evidence of a crime. "Cole is deliberately undermining every project, poisoning every relationship. We need to take legal action." Frank had studied the younger man with the weary resignation of someone watching his life's work crumble. "What grounds? Cole isn't breaking any contracts or violating any agreements. He's just competing. He's using inside information, relationships he built while working for us. That has to be illegal." Helen had looked up from the financial statements that showed their company bleeding money like a severed artery. "Trevor, those relationships exist because Cole spent 18 years building trust and delivering results. You can't inherit loyalty like you inherit a bank account." But Trevor's desperation was evolving into something darker and more dangerous. He'd started making calls to lawyers, private investigators, and business consultants who specialized in hostile takeovers and competitive sabotage. If Cole Brennan wanted to play dirty, Trevor Walsh was prepared to escalate the conflict beyond the boundaries of traditional business competition. The call came on a Friday evening while Cole was reviewing architectural plans for Morrison Development's newest acquisition, a mixed-use complex that Brennan Construction had been bidding on for 8 months. Trevor's voice was different now, harder and more focused than the panicked desperation Cole had heard previously. "Cole, we need to meet. Face to face. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Trevor. We do if you want to avoid some very public and very expensive legal problems." Cole set down his pencil and gave Trevor his full attention. "What kind of legal problems?" "The kind that happen when former employees use confidential information and proprietary relationships to compete against their former employer. Industrial espionage, theft of trade secrets, tortious interference with business relationships." Cole's laugh was genuinely amused. "Trevor, I didn't steal anything. I built those relationships with my own work, my own reputation, my own credibility. You can't copyright trust. We'll see what a judge thinks. Monday morning, I'm filing suit for damages, injunctive relief, and criminal referral to the district attorney's office." The threat should have worried Cole, but instead, it energized him. Trevor Walsh was about to learn that legal warfare was just another type of construction project, and Cole Brennan had never lost a project he'd set his mind to completing. "Trevor," Cole said quietly, "you have no idea what you're about to start." "Try me." Cole smiled, already planning his next move. "See you in court." But litigation would be just the opening salvo in a war that would escalate far beyond lawsuits and injunctions. Trevor had made the mistake of threatening Cole with public humiliation and financial destruction, not understanding that Cole Brennan was the kind of man who responded to threats by removing the source of the threat permanently. The legal battle would provide perfect cover for the kind of systematic destruction that would leave Trevor Walsh with nothing but debt, disgrace, and the bitter knowledge that he'd brought it all on himself by stealing from the wrong man. Phase 2 of Cole's revenge was about to begin, and it would make the business competition look like a friendly disagreement between neighbors. Trevor had just declared war on someone who'd spent his entire life building things to last forever and who now had nothing left to lose. Chapter 5: Legal Warfare and Dirty Money. The lawsuit Trevor filed was comprehensive, aggressive, and completely misguided. 63 pages of legal grievances alleging industrial espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional interference with business relationships, all supported by evidence that wouldn't convince a first-year law student, let alone a federal judge. Cole read the complaint in his attorney's office on Monday morning, his expression growing more amused with each allegation. Richardson, his divorce attorney who'd now expanded into business litigation, was practically salivating over the opportunity to dismantle Trevor's case. "This is amateur hour," Richardson said, flipping through the pages with undisguised contempt. His legal team is charging him Manhattan rates to file a lawsuit that's going to get thrown out on summary judgment. "Look at this. They're claiming you stole proprietary customer relationships that you personally developed over 15 years. Cole was already 3 steps ahead of the legal maneuvering. How long before this goes to discovery? 6 months minimum. Could be longer if they file for injunctive relief." "Perfect." Cole's smile was predatory. "That gives us plenty of time to explore Mr. Walsh's background more thoroughly." While Trevor was burning through his legal budget on a lawsuit designed to intimidate rather than win, Cole was conducting a different kind of investigation. The private detective he'd hired wasn't looking for criminal behavior or financial fraud. Cole had no interest in exposing Trevor's past crimes, assuming they existed. Instead, he was mapping Trevor's current vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and pressure points that could be exploited. The first discovery was Trevor's financing structure. The smooth-talking businessman who'd convinced Frank and Helen Brennan to trust him with their life's work had acquired Brennan Construction through a complex web of leverage buyouts, private equity loans, and personal guarantees that made him personally liable for the company's debts. Trevor Walsh wasn't a successful entrepreneur. He was a financial acrobat who'd built his entire lifestyle on borrowed money and inflated asset valuations. The luxury watches, expensive cars, and exclusive club memberships were all financed through credit lines secured against business assets that were rapidly declining in value. But Cole's real breakthrough came when his investigator discovered the source of Trevor's initial capital. Margaret Walsh, Trevor's ex-wife, who'd received a substantial divorce settlement from her tech executive husband in California. Trevor had convinced her to invest her divorce money in his acquisition vehicle, promising returns that would set her up for life. Margaret Walsh was living in a modest apartment in San Francisco, working as a real estate agent, and completely unaware that her ex-husband was leveraging her money to play businessman on the East Coast. Her divorce settlement was secured against Brennan Construction's assets, making her an unwitting partner in Trevor's increasingly desperate venture. Cole studied Margaret's photographs and financial records with the focused intensity he normally reserved for structural engineering problems. She was attractive in a wholesome way that suggested she'd been genuinely deceived rather than complicit in Trevor's schemes. More importantly, she represented a pressure point that Trevor couldn't defend against. The phone call to Margaret Walsh was carefully planned and devastating in its simplicity. Cole introduced himself as a business consultant reviewing Brennan Construction's financial structure for potential investors. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm calling because our due diligence has revealed that you're a significant creditor in this transaction. I wanted to ensure you're aware of the current financial status of your investment." Margaret's voice was confused but polite. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake. I'm not involved in any business transactions on the East Coast." Cole's tone remained professionally neutral. "Ma'am, according to the financing documents we've reviewed, you provided $2.3 million in seed capital for your ex-husband's acquisition of Brennan Construction. Those funds are secured against company assets as a senior debt obligation." The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Margaret spoke again, her voice smaller and much less confident. "Trevor told me that money was for a real estate investment fund in Nevada. He said it was completely separate from his other business activities. I'm afraid that's not accurate. Would you like me to email you copies of the relevant documentation?" Cole spent the next hour walking Margaret Walsh through the financial reality of her ex-husband's business empire. She learned that her divorce settlement was tied to a construction company she'd never heard of, securing debts she'd never authorized, for a business venture that was hemorrhaging money at an alarming rate. By the end of the conversation, Margaret Walsh was no longer a silent partner in Trevor's schemes. She was a creditor demanding immediate answers and considering legal action to protect her investment. Trevor received Margaret's call while he was in a deposition for the lawsuit against Cole, trying to explain to opposing counsel why customer relationships developed over 15 years should be considered proprietary company assets. His phone buzzed with a California number he recognized, and his expression shifted from confident litigation posture to something approaching panic. "I need a recess," he told the court reporter, stepping into the hallway to take the call that would destroy his carefully constructed facade. "Trevor Walsh, what the hell have you done with my money?" Margaret's voice carried the fury of someone who discovered they'd been systematically deceived and financially raped by someone they trusted. Trevor tried to maintain his smooth composure, but the stress of managing a failing business while conducting aggressive litigation was taking its toll. "Margaret, I can explain everything. The investment is solid. It's just experiencing some temporary cash flow issues. Don't you dare lie to me again." Margaret's voice rose to a shout that echoed down the courthouse hallway. "I just spent 2 hours on the phone with a consultant who showed me exactly where my money went. You used my divorce settlement to buy a construction company that's about to go bankrupt." Trevor's carefully managed public image cracked as other attorneys and court personnel turned to stare at the well-dressed businessman having what appeared to be a very public financial meltdown in a federal courthouse. "Margaret, please. We can work this out. The company just needs time to stabilize." "Time?" Margaret's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Trevor, you're 3 months behind on debt service, your biggest contracts have been canceled, and you're burning through operating capital like you're trying to heat the building by setting money on fire. I want my investment back. I want it back now, and if you can't produce it, my attorney will be in touch about asset recovery options." The call ended with Margaret hanging up, leaving Trevor standing in a courthouse hallway, holding a dead phone, and realizing that his financial house of cards was about to collapse with spectacular and very public consequences. Cole, meanwhile, was already implementing the next phase of his plan. Margaret Walsh's financial panic would force Trevor to liquidate assets or secure emergency financing, both of which would require disclosing the true scope of Brennan Construction's financial problems to investors and creditors who've been operating under very different assumptions about the company's stability. But Cole's real masterstroke was yet to come. While Trevor was scrambling to manage his collapsing lawsuit and angry creditors, Cole was quietly assembling the resources to acquire Brennan Construction's assets when Trevor's leveraged empire finally imploded. Morrison Development had grown substantially over the past few months, thanks largely to contracts and relationships Cole had systematically stripped away for Brennan Construction. They now had the financial capacity and industry credibility to absorb a larger competitor's assets, especially if those assets were available at fire sale prices due to motivated sellers facing bankruptcy. Cole's plan was elegant in its brutality: force Trevor into financial crisis, acquire Brennan Construction's remaining assets for pennies on the dollar, and rebuild the company under new ownership with Cole in complete control. Trevor and Lily would be left with nothing but debt and the bitter knowledge that their betrayal had cost them everything they tried to steal. But the plan required patience, precision, and perfect timing. Trevor Walsh was about to discover that Cole Brennan's greatest talent wasn't construction. It was destruction executed with the methodical precision of someone who understood exactly how to bring down structures built on weak foundations. The legal warfare was just beginning, but Cole had already won the war. Trevor just didn't know it yet. Chapter 6: The House of Cards Falls. The emergency board meeting at Brennan Construction felt like a funeral where the corpse kept trying to explain why it wasn't actually dead. Trevor sat at the head of the conference table, his silver hair slightly disheveled and his expensive suit doing little to mask the desperation radiating from him like heat from a fever. Frank and Helen Brennan occupied chairs that seemed too large for their shrinking frames, looking like refugees from their own company. The 3 other board members, local business leaders who'd invested in Brennan Construction during its growth years, studied financial reports with the grim expressions of doctors reviewing terminal diagnoses. "The situation is challenging but manageable," Trevor was saying, his voice carrying less conviction than a used car salesman. "We've experienced some temporary setbacks, but the fundamentals of the business remain sound." Board member Patricia Mills, who owned the largest commercial real estate firm in the county, looked up from the quarterly statements with unconcealed skepticism. "Trevor, you've lost 3 major contracts in 2 months. Your biggest creditor is threatening asset seizure. Your legal bills are approaching six figures for a lawsuit that our attorneys say is fundamentally unwinnable. Exactly which fundamentals are we supposed to find reassuring? Trevor's attempt at corporate spin crumbled under direct questioning. The marketplace is adjusting to our transition. Cole Brennan's interference has created temporary disruptions, but once we establish our own relationships. Cole built those relationships over 18 years, Frank interrupted, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. His voice carried the hollow tone of a man watching his legacy burn. You've had 4 months. How much more time do you need? The question hung in the air like smoke from an electrical fire. Everyone in the room knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it aloud. Trevor Walsh needed time they didn't have, resources they'd already burned through, and credibility he'd never possessed. Helen Brennan's voice was barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. How much money do we have left? Trevor's financial officer, a nervous accountant named Peters who'd been updating his resume since the Riverside contract fell through, consulted his laptop with the reluctance of someone delivering a death sentence. Operating capital will last 6 weeks at current burn rate. We have equipment loans coming due next month, payroll obligations, and supplier agreements that require immediate payment. What about emergency financing? Board member Davidson asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I've explored several options, Trevor said, which was technically true if you counted pleading phone calls to unsympathetic loan officers as exploration. The challenge is that most lenders want to see stable cash flow and clear growth projections. They want to see that we're not hemorrhaging money like a severed artery, Patricia Mills interrupted. Trevor, this company is insolvent. We need to start talking about asset protection and orderly liquidation. The phrase, orderly liquidation, hit the room like a physical blow. Frank Brennan made a sound that could have been a sob or a grunt of pain. Helen closed her eyes, as if she could make the entire situation disappear through force of will. But Trevor wasn't ready to surrender his prize without a fight. There's another option. Cole Brennan's interference is actionable. If we can prove he's deliberately sabotaging our business relationships. For Christ's sake, Trevor. Frank's voice exploded with months of accumulated frustration and regret. Cole isn't sabotaging anything. He's competing. He's doing exactly what I taught him to do: build relationships, deliver results, and take care of his customers. The only difference is he's not doing it for us anymore. The outburst silenced the room. Frank Brennan rarely raised his voice, and seeing the family patriarch lose control was more disturbing than the financial statements they'd been reviewing. Helen reached across the table and took her husband's weathered hand. Frank, please. But Frank wasn't finished. The guilt and shame that had been eating at him for months finally found its voice. You want to know why we're failing? Because we gave away something that took 30 years to build to a man who thought he could buy it like a piece of equipment. Cole Brennan was Brennan Construction. Without him, we're just another contractor with trucks and debt. Trevor's composure finally cracked completely. Your son is destroying this company out of spite. He's using everything he learned here to compete against us, stealing our clients, undermining our relationships. Everything he learned here. Frank's laugh was bitter and sharp. Trevor, Cole didn't learn this business. He built it. Every system, every process, every relationship you're failing to maintain, he created them from nothing while you were getting your MBA and networking at country clubs. The meeting devolved into recriminations and blame shifting that solved nothing but confirmed what everyone already knew. Brennan Construction was dying, and Trevor Walsh was either unwilling or unable to save it. Meanwhile, Cole was having the most productive afternoon of his professional life. Morrison Development had just been awarded the municipal courthouse renovation, the Brooklyn mixed-use development, and a commercial plaza project that would keep their crews busy through the next 18 months. More importantly, these weren't just contracts. They were proof of concept that Cole Brennan could rebuild his business empire faster than Trevor Walsh could destroy the original. The call from Patricia Mills came just as Cole was reviewing architectural plans for the courthouse restoration. Her voice was professional, but carried undertones of someone delivering a business proposition that both parties understood was more complex than simple commerce. Cole, I'm calling in my capacity as a board member of Brennan Construction. We need to discuss the company's future. Cole set down his pencil and gave Patricia his full attention. She'd been a friend and occasional business partner for over a decade, someone who understood both the construction industry and the personal dynamics that had led to the current situation. I'm listening. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss asset liquidation. Trevor's management has been unsuccessful. We're looking at bankruptcy protection unless we can find a buyer willing to assume the debt and honor existing contracts. Cole felt a surge of satisfaction that he was careful to keep out of his voice. That's unfortunate. Frank and Helen must be devastated. They are, but they're also pragmatic enough to know that emotional attachment won't pay the bills or save the company. Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. Cole, if Morrison Development were interested in acquiring Brennan Construction's assets, the board would be very receptive to discussions. The offer was exactly what Cole had been positioning for, but he let silence stretch between them, maintaining the illusion that he needed to consider an opportunity he'd been engineering for months. What kind of assets are we talking about? Equipment, active contracts, client relationships, the headquarters building. Essentially everything except the debt structure, which would remain Trevor's responsibility. Cole smiled, though Patricia couldn't see it through the phone. Trevor had leveraged his personal assets to acquire Brennan Construction, which meant he'd remain personally liable for the debt even after losing control of the business. It was financial death by 1,000 cuts, slowly bleeding money to creditors while watching someone else profit from the assets he'd thought he owned. I'd need to review the numbers, Cole said, maintaining his professional tone, and any acquisition would be contingent on Morrison Development having complete operational control. Of course, Trevor would retain a minority ownership stake, but operational decisions would be entirely yours. Cole almost laughed at the irony. Trevor Walsh would become a silent partner in the business he'd stolen, watching Cole rebuild it while remaining legally obligated to pay the debts Trevor had accumulated during his disastrous tenure. Patricia, I'll have my attorney draw up a preliminary offer, but I want to be clear about one thing. This would be a hostile acquisition. Trevor Walsh would have no operational authority, no management input, and no decision-making power. Morrison Development would be acquiring assets, not partnerships. Understood. Frankly, Cole, the board is more concerned with salvaging something from this situation than protecting Trevor's ego. After the call ended, Cole sat in his office, looking out at the construction yard where Morrison Development's trucks were preparing for another day of building other people's dreams. In 6 months, those trucks would bear the Brennan Construction logo again, but this time the company would belong to someone who understood the difference between owning a business and earning it. Trevor Walsh had wanted to inherit Cole's empire without paying the price Cole had paid to build it. Soon, Trevor would learn that some things couldn't be stolen. They could only be earned through 18 years of brutal work, absolute dedication, and the kind of ruthless determination that turned betrayal into motivation rather than defeat. The final phase of Cole's revenge was about to begin, and it would be far more devastating than anything Trevor could have imagined when he'd first decided to steal another man's life. Chapter 7. The Acquisition. The Morrison Development Conference Room felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Cole sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, flanked by his attorney Richardson and financial advisor Catherine Lynch, reviewing acquisition documents that would effectively erase Trevor Walsh from the construction industry. Across the table, Trevor looked like a man attending his own execution. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weight loss, the shadows under his eyes, or the way his hands trembled slightly as he signed papers that would strip him of everything he'd thought he'd won. His own attorney, a corporate specialist named Hendricks, kept shooting apologetic glances that suggested he'd advised against this meeting entirely. Frank and Helen Brennan sat to Trevor's right, their faces etched with the kind of grief normally reserved for actual funerals. They were watching their life's work change hands for the second time in a year, but this time they understood they were selling to someone who'd earned the right to own it. The acquisition price is $4.2 million, Catherine Lynch announced, her voice carrying the clinical precision of someone reading a medical examiner's report. Morrison Development will assume all active contracts, equipment leases, and client relationships. Mr. Walsh retains responsibility for all existing debt obligations, legal liabilities, and creditor agreements. Trevor's attorney leaned forward. My client should clarify that the debt obligations total approximately $7.8 million. Cole's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a note of mock concern. Trevor, that seems like quite a burden. Are you sure you can handle the financial responsibility? The question was designed to humiliate, and it succeeded. Trevor had spent months positioning himself as a sophisticated businessman who could manage a complex enterprise, and now he was being forced to admit that his management had accumulated debt nearly twice the company's current value. The debt is manageable, Trevor said through gritted teeth, though everyone in the room knew he was lying. Patricia Mills, representing the board's interests, cleared her throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should review the operational transition timeline. Cole smiled with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver the final stroke. There won't be a transition period. Morrison Development takes operational control immediately upon contract execution. All management decisions, personnel assignments, and strategic planning become our exclusive responsibility. What about existing staff? Helen asked, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Any employee who wants to continue working for what's about to become Brennan Construction again will be welcome, Cole said, his voice softening slightly when addressing his mother. Anyone who prefers to seek opportunities elsewhere will receive appropriate severance and references. Trevor's face had gone pale as he realized the full scope of what was happening. He'd thought this was a business transaction that would leave him as a minority partner with reduced responsibilities. Instead, he was being completely ejected from the company he'd acquired through marriage and leverage buyouts. I want to retain some operational input, Trevor said desperately. Advisory, capacity, strategic consultation, something that recognizes my investment and expertise. Cole's laugh was genuinely amused. Trevor, your expertise has cost this company 60% of its value in 4 months. What exactly would you advise us to do? How to lose more contracts? How to alienate more clients? How to accumulate more debt? Richardson slid a thick folder across the table to Trevor's attorney. Your client might want to review these documents before making any demands about ongoing involvement. Hendricks opened the folder, and his expression immediately shifted from professional concern to barely concealed alarm. The documents contained a comprehensive analysis of Trevor's financial exposure, including personal guarantees, leveraged assets, and cross-collateralized debt that would take years to resolve even if he found stable employment immediately. Your client is personally liable for equipment loans, supplier agreements, and legal settlements that will continue generating obligations long after this acquisition is completed, Richardson explained with clinical detachment. Frankly, Mr. Walsh should be focused on bankruptcy protection rather than management consultation. Trevor's composure finally shattered completely. This is extortion. You're stealing a company that I legitimately acquired. Cole's voice remained perfectly calm. Trevor, you acquired this company through marriage to my ex-wife and promises you couldn't keep to parents who trusted your lies. I'm acquiring it through legitimate business competition and superior performance. The difference is that I actually know how to run it. Frank Brennan had been silent through most of the negotiation, but now he looked across the table at his son with eyes that held recognition, regret, and something that might have been pride. Cole, Frank said quietly, we owe you an apology that can never be adequate. We let fear and age and stupidity convince us to give away something that belonged to you. Cole studied his father's face, this man who'd sacrificed everything to build a business that could support his family and provide opportunities for his son. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, Cole felt something other than cold fury. Dad, you built this company from nothing. You gave me opportunities and training and support that most people never get. You don't owe me an apology for trusting the wrong person. Helen was crying now, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she watched her son reclaim his birthright through sheer force of will and business acumen. "Will you keep the Brennan name?" she asked through her tears. Cole's smile was gentle and genuine for the first time in months. "Ma, it was always the Brennan name. That never changed." The contract signing took another hour, with Trevor reluctantly executing documents that would leave him financially devastated but legally powerless to interfere with the company's operations. When the last signature was complete, Cole stood and walked around the table to where Trevor sat, slumped in defeat. "Trevor," Cole said quietly, "I want you to understand something. This isn't about business competition or market dynamics. This is about the difference between earning something and stealing it. You thought you could inherit 18 years of my work by marrying my ex-wife. Now you get to learn what it feels like to lose everything you thought you owned." Trevor looked up with eyes that held a mixture of hatred and desperation. "This isn't over, Cole. I won't just disappear quietly." Cole's expression hardened back into the merciless focus that had driven his revenge campaign. "Trevor, you're $7.8 million in debt, personally liable for business obligations you can't meet, and legally prohibited from interfering with Brennan Construction's operations. You're already disappearing. The only question is how much noise you'll make while you're sinking." He turned to address the room. "Morrison Development will transition Brennan Construction back to independent operations within 60 days. All current employees will receive new contracts with improved compensation packages. All existing clients will be contacted personally to ensure continuity of service." Cole paused at the door, looking back at Trevor one final time. "Oh, and Trevor, Lily's alimony payments from my divorce settlement in next month. I hope she's been saving money, because you're about to find out how expensive it is to maintain a lifestyle you can't afford." The door closed behind him with the finality of a tomb sealing shut, leaving Trevor Walsh alone with the wreckage of his ambitions and the dawning realization that Cole Brennan's revenge was far from over. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. The first eviction notice arrived at Trevor and Lily's Westchester mansion on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who seemed apologetic about the whole business. Lily stood in her silk robe and designer slippers, staring at legal documents that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics for all the sense they made to her. "There must be some mistake," she told the deputy, her voice carrying the confident dismissal of someone accustomed to problems that money could solve. "My husband handles all the financial matters." The deputy, a middle-aged man who delivered enough bad news to recognize denial when he saw it, simply nodded. "Ma'am, you'll need to contact the creditor directly. The paperwork explains your options." After he left, Lily found Trevor in his study, surrounded by towers of legal documents and empty coffee cups, looking like a general planning a defense with an army that had already deserted. His silver hair was uncombed, his expensive shirt wrinkled from sleeping in his chair, and his eyes held the hollow stare of someone watching his world collapse in real time. "Trevor, there's a man here saying we're being evicted. That's impossible, right? This is our house." Trevor looked up from a credit card statement that might as well have been a suicide note. "Lily, we need to talk." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in financial devastation. Lily learned that the mansion was mortgaged against Trevor's business assets, which now belonged to Cole Brennan. The cars were leased through corporate accounts that had been frozen. The credit cards were maxed out and being called in by banks that no longer considered Trevor a reliable risk. "How much money do we have?" Lily asked, her voice small and frightened. Trevor's laugh was the sound of a man who'd run out of miracles. "In liquid assets? About $8,000. Maybe 10 if we sell your jewelry." Lily felt the room spinning as she processed the magnitude of their situation. "But you said you were a successful businessman. You said you had investments, connections, resources." "I said a lot of things." Trevor's voice carried the bitter resignation of someone who'd gambled everything on a losing proposition. "I leveraged everything I owned to buy Brennan Construction. When Cole destroyed the business, he destroyed me too." The financial unraveling accelerated over the following weeks like a controlled demolition. The mansion went into foreclosure. The luxury cars were repossessed. The country club memberships were canceled for non-payment. Trevor's carefully constructed image as a successful entrepreneur evaporated like morning mist, leaving behind only debt and the bitter knowledge that he'd been systematically outmaneuvered by someone he'd underestimated. But Cole wasn't finished. The private investigator Cole had hired wasn't looking for criminal evidence or financial fraud. He was mapping every aspect of Trevor and Lily's social and professional networks, identifying pressure points that could be exploited to ensure their exile from the circles they'd try to join. The revelation came in the form of a detailed report about Trevor's previous business ventures, all of which followed the same pattern. Charm investors with impressive credentials, leverage their money to acquire assets, then systematically strip value while accumulating personal debt. Trevor Walsh wasn't a businessman. He was a financial parasite who moved from host to host, leaving destruction in his wake. Margaret Walsh in California had been his first victim, not his ex-wife. She'd been his business partner until he'd maneuvered her out of their real estate development company, using her own investment capital to buy her out at a fraction of the business's actual value. The divorce settlement she thought she was investing was actually money she was owed from the partnership he dissolved through legal manipulation. But the most damaging discovery was Trevor's current employment history. He'd been working as a consultant for Meridian Development, a mid-tier construction firm that specialized in municipal contracts. His job had given him inside information about Brennan Construction's bidding strategies, client relationships, and financial vulnerabilities, information he'd used to position himself as a potential buyer. Trevor Walsh hadn't stumbled into an opportunity to acquire Brennan Construction. He'd been planning the acquisition for months, using inside information and deliberate manipulation to create the circumstances that would allow him to steal Cole's life's work. Cole studied the investigator's report with the focused intensity he normally reserved for structural engineering problems. Trevor hadn't just betrayed Cole through his affair with Lily. He'd been systematically planning to destroy Cole's business from the moment they'd met. The revenge Cole had planned suddenly felt inadequate. Financial ruin and public humiliation were appropriate punishments for opportunistic theft, but Trevor's calculated betrayal required something more permanent and personally devastating. The confrontation took place in the parking lot of the unemployment office where Trevor had gone to file for benefits. Cole was waiting beside Trevor's remaining asset, a 5-year-old Honda that had been hidden from creditors through a title transfer to one of Lily's relatives. "Hello, Trevor." Trevor's reaction was pure terror disguised as bravado. "Cole, I was wondering when you'd show up to gloat." Cole studied Trevor's appearance with clinical detachment. The expensive suits had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing that hung poorly on his diminished frame. The silver hair that had once looked distinguished now just looked gray and unwashed. The confident posture had been replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone expecting another blow. "I'm not here to gloat, Trevor. I'm here to explain why what happened to you was inevitable." Trevor's laugh was bitter and defensive. "You destroyed my life out of revenge. Don't try to dress it up as some kind of cosmic justice." Cole's voice remained perfectly calm. "Trevor, I didn't destroy your life. I just stopped propping it up. Everything you lost, the business, the money, the respect, the lifestyle, none of it was ever really yours. You were borrowing against other people's work and other people's trust." He pulled out a folder containing the investigator's report. Margaret Walsh in California, the Patterson Development Partnership in Phoenix, the residential construction company in Denver. "You've been running this same scam for 15 years, haven't you?" Trevor's face went white as he recognized the documented pattern of his financial predation. Those were legitimate business transactions. Legitimate. Cole's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "Trevor, you systematically identified successful businesses, infiltrated their operations, gained the trust of key stakeholders, then engineered circumstances that allowed you to acquire control while leaving the original owners responsible for the debt." The folder hit the Honda's hood with a sound like a gavel falling. "You're not a businessman, Trevor. You're a financial predator. And predators only survive as long as their prey doesn't recognize what they are." Trevor's composure cracked completely. "What do you want? Money? I don't have any. Apologies? Fine, I'm sorry. Revenge? You've already destroyed everything I had." Cole stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Trevor, What I want is for you to understand that this isn't over. You thought you could steal my life, destroy my family's business, and move on to your next victim. But I'm not going to let you disappear into whatever hole you crawl into next. He leaned against the Honda, his casual posture contrasting with the menace in his voice. I'm going to make sure that every potential employer, every potential investor, every woman who might be stupid enough to trust you, knows exactly what you are. You're going to discover that reputation follows you everywhere, and yours is going to make you unemployable. Trevor's face had gone from white to gray. That's harassment. I could file charges. Cole's smile was genuinely amused. File charges for what? Telling the truth? Trevor, everything in that folder is documented fact. Public records, court filings, financial statements. I'm not going to have to lie about you to destroy your future. I just have to make sure people know your past. He pushed away from the car and started walking toward his truck. Oh, and Trevor? Lily's divorce attorney contacted me yesterday. Apparently, she's decided that being married to a financially devastated con artist isn't the lifestyle upgrade she was looking for. She'll be moving back in with her parents in Connecticut while she figures out her next move. The sound Trevor made might have been a sob or a growl of rage. Cole didn't turn around to check. He'd said everything he'd come to say, and Trevor Walsh's emotional breakdown wasn't his concern. But Cole's revenge was entering its final phase, and the psychological destruction he'd just delivered was only the beginning of Trevor's real education and consequences. There were still debts to be paid, lessons to be learned, and prices to be extracted from people who betrayed trust and family loyalty. The war was almost over, but the most brutal battles were yet to come. Chapter 9, Final Reckoning. 6 months after reclaiming Brennan Construction, Cole stood in his father's hospital room, watching machines monitor the vital signs of a man who'd built an empire with his bare hands and nearly lost it through misplaced trust. Frank's heart attack had been massive, but not fatal. The kind of warning that forced conversations about mortality and legacy that proud men usually avoided until it was too late. The doctors say you'll be fine, Cole said, settling into the bedside chair that had become his second office. But they want you to retire. No stress, no heavy lifting, no 12-hour days arguing with contractors. Frank's smile was weak but genuine. Sounds like hell. Helen looked up from her knitting, her eyes red with exhaustion and worry. Frank Brennan, you'll do exactly what the doctors tell you, or I'll finish what that heart attack started. The family dynamic felt different now. Less strained, more honest. The betrayal and reconciliation had burned away the polite distance that had developed over the years, leaving behind the raw affection of people who'd survived something terrible together. What about the business? Frank asked, though they all knew the answer. Cole had spent the past months rebuilding Brennan Construction into something larger and more successful than it had ever been. The combination of Morrison Development's resources with the Brennan name's reputation had created opportunities that neither company could have achieved separately. They were now the largest construction firm in the tri-state area, with projects that would keep them busy for the next 5 years. The business is solid, Dad. Better than solid. We're turning away work because we don't have enough crews to handle all the contracts. Frank nodded, his eyes drifting to the window, where he could see construction cranes in the distance. Cole, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Cole set down the quarterly reports he'd been reviewing. Anything. Do you forgive us? Your mother and me, for what we did with Trevor? The question hung in the room like smoke from an electrical fire. Helen stopped knitting, her fingers frozen in mid-stitch. The machines continued their electronic chorus, marking time while Cole considered how to answer. Dad, you and Ma sacrificed everything to build something permanent for our family. You worked 18-hour days so I could go to college. You invested your life savings in equipment and contracts that could have failed. You taught me everything I know about business, about integrity, about what it means to build something that lasts. Cole paused, choosing his words carefully. Trevor Walsh convinced you that I was burning out, that the business needed fresh leadership, that change would be good for everyone. He manipulated your love for me and your fear for the company's future. You didn't betray me. You were betrayed by someone who understood exactly how to exploit your best instincts. Frank's eyes were bright with tears he was too proud to shed. But we should have trusted you. We should have known. Dad, you to trust me. You trusted me to understand why you made the choices you made, and you trusted me to fix the problems those choices created. Cole's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd thought through every aspect of a complex situation. You were right on both counts. Helen finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What about Trevor and Lily? What happened to them? Cole's expression hardened slightly, but his voice remained conversational. Trevor Walsh is currently working as a night security guard in Philadelphia, living in a studio apartment and making monthly payments on debt that will take him the rest of his life to clear. Every background check for any job better than minimum wage reveals his financial history and business failures. He's unemployable in any industry that requires trust or responsibility. And Lily moved back in with her parents in Connecticut after her divorce from Trevor was finalized. She's working at a boutique in Greenwich, trying to rebuild her social standing with people who remember when she was married to someone successful. Cole's smile was coldly satisfied. She discovered that her connections to high society were based on my money and status, not her personal charm. Without those, she's just another divorced woman with expensive tastes and no income. Helen's expression was troubled. Cole, that seems harsh. Cole turned to face his mother directly. Ma, these people didn't make mistakes or errors in judgment. They planned and executed a deliberate theft of our family's life work. Trevor used inside information to position himself as a buyer, then manipulated you and Dad into trusting him. Lily violated 8 years of marriage vows and betrayed every promise she'd ever made to me. His voice carried the finality of concrete setting. They made calculated decisions to steal from us, destroy our family, and profit from our destruction. What happened to them isn't harsh, it's proportional. They gambled our family's future on their ability to manipulate us, and they lost. Frank studied his son's face with the recognition of someone seeing familiar traits in a different context. You really don't forgive or forget, do you? Dad, forgiveness is for people who make mistakes and learn from them. Trevor and Lily didn't make mistakes. They made choices. And choices have consequences. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the hospital room door. Cole's attorney Richardson entered with a man Cole didn't recognize. Well-dressed, professional, carrying the kind of expensive briefcase that suggested either very good news or very bad problems. Cole, this is Detective Ray Morrison from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. He'd like to ask you some questions about Trevor Walsh. Cole's expression didn't change, but he gestured for the detective to take a seat. What can I help you with, detective? Morrison consulted his notes with the methodical precision of someone building a case. Mr. Brennan, we're investigating Mr. Walsh in connection with a pattern of investment fraud and identity theft. Your private investigator's report was forwarded to our office by one of Walsh's previous victims, Margaret Walsh in California, among others. It appears Mr. Walsh has been running similar schemes for over a decade, using romantic relationships and business partnerships to gain access to victims' assets. Morrison looked up from his notes. We'd like your cooperation in documenting his activities related to Brennan Construction. Cole felt a surge of satisfaction that he was careful to keep out of his expression. Detective, I'll provide whatever assistance your investigation requires. But privately, Cole was already calculating how Trevor's arrest and prosecution would affect his long-term plans for revenge. A criminal conviction would ensure that Trevor's financial and social destruction became permanent and public, eliminating any possibility of rehabilitation or recovery. The detective left his contact information and promised to follow up within the week. After he was gone, Frank looked at his son with an expression that mixed admiration with concern. Cole, did you know about Trevor's criminal history when you started your campaign against him? No, Dad. I knew he was a predator and a manipulator, but I didn't know about the fraud pattern. Cole's smile was genuinely amused. I was planning to destroy him through legitimate business competition and financial pressure. The criminal prosecution is just a bonus. Helen shook her head in amazement. Cole, sometimes you frighten me a little. Ma, I don't start fights. But when someone attacks our family, I finish them completely and permanently. Cole's voice carried the implacable certainty of someone who'd never lost a battle he'd chosen to fight. Trevor Walsh and Lily made the mistake of thinking they could steal from us and move on to their next victims. They're going to spend the rest of their lives learning how wrong they were. Frank reached out and took his son's hand, his grip still strong despite the heart attack. Cole, I'm proud of you, not just for saving the business, but for protecting our family when we were too old and stupid to protect ourselves. Cole squeezed his father's hand gently. Dad, you and Ma built something worth protecting. All I did was make sure it stayed in the right hands. As Cole left the hospital that evening, he reflected on how completely his world had changed in less than a year. He'd lost a wife who'd never deserved his loyalty, learned the true character of people he'd trusted, and discovered exactly how far he was willing to go to protect what mattered most. Trevor Walsh and Lily had thought they could destroy Cole Brennan's life and steal his legacy. Instead, they'd freed him from illusions about loyalty and love, taught him the value of ruthless determination, and provided him with the motivation to build something larger and more permanent than anything he'd previously imagined. Brennan Construction was no longer just a family business. It was a monument to the principle that some people couldn't be betrayed, some things couldn't be stolen, and some men never forgave anyone who mistook their devotion for weakness. Cole Brennan had learned to build with concrete and steel, but his greatest construction project had been himself, forged in betrayal, tempered by revenge, and built to last forever. The war was over, and Cole had won so completely that his enemies would spend the rest of their lives paying the price for underestimating what happens when someone steals from the wrong man. Frank and Helen would live to see their grandchildren inherit a business empire that dwarfed anything they'd originally imagined, built by a son who'd proven that some legacies are worth any price and some betrayals deserve permanent consequences. Trevor Walsh would die in poverty and obscurity, a cautionary tale about the difference between earning success and stealing it. And Cole Brennan would continue building, creating, and protecting what mattered most, secure in the knowledge that he'd never again trust anyone who hadn't earned it through years of proven loyalty. Some lessons are worth learning, no matter how much they cost. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.